Hello, welcome to today's Facebook Live event, or the Fabricator Live as it's sometimes known as amongst our plethora of fans out there in the internet world. Dan Davis, I'm not senior editor, I'm editor-in-chief for the Fabricator. Tim might have been promoted for all I know. Tim Heston has joined me, senior editor of the Fabricator. We're here to talk about our July issue, give you a heads up as to what you can read about in the publication. If you haven't received it already, it should be on its way. If not, give us a ring and we'll make sure you get a copy. Tim, we were talking about, before I was supposed to plug this. This will be the last rendition of this type of issue discussion because the Fabricator will be launching something in the coming weeks. Let's just call it a video podcast series. That's about all I can say right now because really I have nothing else to share. But we'll be doing something similar like what we're doing here, except taking the discussion beyond the pages of the Fabricator and talking with actual people in the industry. We think you'll like it. So enough about that. Tim, we're kind of chatting beforehand, and I know that when it came to the July issue, something that kind of stuck out with you was something you covered in your Biz Talk column. And we were talking about certain facets of leadership. I don't know whether you want to expound upon that.
Yeah, I covered. This is a kind of a. I met Joe Mazzeo. He's a consultant in Michigan, lean consultancy there, and he had a great presentation at FabTech about kind of the building blocks of lean manufacturing leadership, and kind of why lean fails so often. He kind of built a structure that I thought was kind of concrete, because usually when you talk about leadership, you talk about building culture and engagement, and there's really, okay, well, how do you do that? It's like, well, give yourself some charisma. It doesn't really make sense. So his presentation really built the nuts and bolts of kind of what makes a lean organization lean, and how a leader can improve upon that structure. And his the basics are continuous improvement activities, built-in quality at the source, standardization, people improvement, and short lead time. And it just the standardization, it's very difficult to have standardization when you have chaos on the floor, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where when you ask about most people and their vision, they can't state it. So basically he's saying, all right, catch them with a good vision statement that actually means something. He mentioned something, and this is something I used in the articles. There's so many mission statements out there that says to be the number one resource for metal fabricated products. Okay, everybody's that,
Right.
Big deal. But there's one shop I talked to that I kind of mentioned this in this article. It says protect your customer brands. Protect
Right.
your customer brands. Why are your customer brands important? Well, because your customer has families to feed too, and so
Right.
it kind of brings it full circle. And so you say, all right, well, this is how we can all get on board with that, and it kind of gives us a virtuous cycle.
Yeah, I think, in terms of engagement, where you mentioned, how nebulous leadership discussion can be. For me, that to me, that the one that jumps out to me is always engagement. And
Right.
I think the real challenge are for those mid-sized to small size. Well, I shouldn't say, I think small, the fewer the people that there are, the more likely they're probably in tune with what the leadership wants to do. In many instances, that leadership's only a doorway away from the people actually kind of doing the work. Get to medium
Right.
and larger size companies, and a lot of new people enter. There's a detachment, whether desired or not, that exists between the shop floor and company leadership. And what I do see though is when the companies, and I wrote about TJ Snow, which is more of a supplier, manufacturer of resistance welding equipment that usually sells to people in manufacturing, but nonetheless they manufacture the equipment there in Chattanooga. And their whole thing is people make it, the reason they're able to win that safety award is and have no injuries in their facility, or people are kind of responsible for their own safety. It's part of the, as you mentioned, continuous improvement, having them involved in decision making. they understand the ramifications. I also did a story involving HUI up in Kiel, Wisconsin, and the whole gist of the story initially was discussion of how Fabricator has a product line. They make a variety of medical carts for the medical industry, and how they maintain that balance between that and job shop activity. But one of the things, and I think fabricators can pick up on this if they read it, is that the person that is now owner of that company, he values the input of his employees to the point when he first took over as chief executive officer. He wanted to invest in training that taught people how to disagree with other people, which frankly, that struck home. I've been married 20 plus years, and I can tell you those first 10 years, man, I could have used some of that. It's just,
right.
sometimes having difficult discussions with other adults can be a tricky, slippery slope. So having that commitment to invest in your people, give them the time to participate. Don't invite them out to continuous improvement project and then have them work an extra 30 minutes to make up for that 30 minutes they spent helping you out. It's small things like that that go a long way to making an impact in a shop environment. So I think people don't want to hear about it, but I think those discussions are somewhat necessary.
Well, and there's two aspects to that with investing your people. When I visit a shop, there's two extremes where I kind of focus on kind of one of the most manual operations on the shop floor, denesting. So I usually go to I see what's going on at the denesting station, and I've seen one extreme or the other. And one extreme was, and I have to say, when I talked to couples, J&J couples a couple of years ago, or couples J&J, excuse me, out in Tennessee, he has a fantastic denesting setup. It's manual, but the engagement is really something to see, because they have manual denesters, but they also have strategies, and they're talking. The manual denesters are talking with the operator. The operator is talking with the programmer how to better to program, which kind of dovetails into our cover story about best nesting practices. But that kind of communication among just denesting, which is nobody wakes up. I always kind of call it like that. I want to be a denester when I grow up and work on the floor and just jam. Who wants to do that? So but it's such a critical aspect of any kind of blanking to bending to welding flow. You just need it, and so for those workers to feel valued and also cross-trained to go to various areas so that they're not always denesting, they're not always just this cog in the wheel, is really something to see. On the other end of that, we're seeing more and more, and especially in the last three or 4 years, we've seen more and more denesting automation, as we see, where the pick and place automation that we saw, for years in Europe, and now it's here in the States, where the software is becoming more robust, and there's more the programming is more intelligent, and there's more error proofing involved, so there's less of a risk of system crash. Right. But you see that, and there used to be an argument where readers used to tell me, say, well, I look at that, especially in punch systems. Oh, I can see that, and we can denest or shake that out, faster than the machine. Mm-hmm. But people get tired, and people don't necessarily want to do that all day. And it's kind of it's very, because people get tired, because it's based on manual labor, it's variable. That's the key. It's variable. So how do you plan around that? Where automation gives you a set capacity, set cycle time, and know exactly when it's going to deposit, when it's going to be available for the next operation. It adds a science to it, as long as it's maintained and as long as it's reliable, and that's the key. We're seeing the world is decrepit.
Well, yeah. I think that's I think anybody can appreciate the fear of investing in something more sophisticated for fear that it's just something else that can go wrong. But when it works, it makes an impact, and I think today's labor market has really forced a lot of companies to make that decision, whereas any hesitancy they might have had, they really don't have a choice, because finding those people, no one wanted to do it all day every week, as you mentioned. Now just being able to find those people to engage with that activity is just it's very difficult.
And it's yeah. What's interesting about that, the cover story from it's from authors at Hypertherm. They were talking about, there are more and more startup shops over the past few years because of this big shift we've seen. I mean, not only have we seen a big shift, it's kind of a big reshuffle I'm seeing, and they're seeing it as well. And not only do you see a change in ownership in larger shops, but you have all these garage shops coming in with these small plaza tables, even small laser cutters. And there's cloud-based nesting software or nesting software by the hour, and it's kind of lowering the barrier to entry. So no longer do you have to nest on the machine, even at the smallest shops. And so even if it's just you and a plasma cutter and a welder, you can have software to send it through, and that's kind of allows you to scale it up and much faster than they used to be. So
I think you touched upon that in not so much July, but another column, correct?
Where you have just
it
lowers the
in terms
barrier
of
to
shops
entry.
being able to scale up pretty quickly. Technology's allowed them to kind of do it on a much more of a fast track than maybe 10, 15 years ago. It is exciting to see.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's,
So the other thing I wanted to discuss is that speaking of relying on employees, the folks at Wilson Tool had reached out to me. So this occurred in March. So our discussions were probably taking place probably in late May to June, but they were hit by a cyber attack, and it literally locked them out of their systems for a good 2 weeks. So I chatted with them, but by the time I had chatted with them, they're almost out of the woods. But they literally could not get to their CAD files, CAM files, ERP files. They're on the outside looking in. And they think it was related to the actual incursion into their systems occurred because they weren't on top of an update. Some system sent a note notifying their IT department of an update. There was some turnover in the IT department. Something slipped by, and it's a big racket. I mean, as it was being described to me, there are people that make the incursions, and then they hand it off to another syndicate, cartel, I don't know what kind of nefarious term you want to use, and then they handle the negotiations. So they're like bracketed tiers of pirates out there on the great cyber sea. So they bring in the insurance attorney, their own attorney, cybersecurity expert, kind of walking them through the negotiation process, and they did pay something. I mean, there's no doubt there. But they were able to survive those first couple weeks based on old school memory of how life was before the ERP system. So they were actually reconfiguring manual processes, creating or finding off server copies of old manual documents they would use. And their goal is always to kind of process requests within a day, and that wasn't happening. It stretched out to about 4 or 5, I think, in some instances. But they never shut down, and they kept moving. And they're to the point where they're going to try to get more consistent for all their locations in terms of hardware, software practices. Do all the things they need to do to kind of avoid this process again. But never underestimate the power of the old timer that may turn his nose up at something extremely modern. But at the same time, you never know when you might need that luxury, and that really kind of I find myself I'm not one that wants to turn his back on modern conveniences, man. But there's some Saturdays where I wish I could just walk down to a record store and just just kind of do some manual perusing or listening some tunes. But times change, and it's funny how sometimes the old can help out the new, given the situation.
Well, it's interesting because 10 years ago at the FMA annual meeting, we had a cybersecurity breakout session, and to be quite frank, not many people showed up.
Right.
They were just there, and I think interest is changing because they're realizing. I mean, this is just off. I went to a restaurant recently, and the computer systems were hacked. They were down. They had a virus, and they couldn't serve anybody.
Yeah.
And my family and my especially my father, who was just like going crazy. He's like, I think I serve, and it's like, what's wrong with pencil and paper, all this kind of stuff. And I have a friend of mine who works in the restaurant industry. He's like, you don't understand, these software systems allow us to serve so many more people and cook so much more food in a streamlined fashion by delivering these just in time to us so that we can actually book more tables and make more money. So you literally have this software really, but then when it crashes, it all comes crashing down. And it's kind of analogous to the sheet metal shop, where we have all this talk of Industry 4.0 and connected machines and Internet of Things. And when it's all connected, you can have computers make decisions that are utterly unintuitive and have sequences that are just would be incredibly complex for a manual scheduler to make. But a computer system can see the whole thing and make some really great choices. So everything flows faster than it ever could on a manual basis. That's the ideal anyway. Not many shops have been there, but that's the ideal. Mm-hmm. Well, what if the system is attacked?
Right.
And then of course you have all those details in the system. There's all sorts of security measures, and of course in that, but you can wreak havoc. It's all, since the computer is handling it. So it's gonna be a more a significant chunk of interest, I think, among the FMA and FabTech audience.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I mean, we're in the midst of the summer season, and just reading about power grids, and people are having scheduled brownouts, in some parts of the country. When you're describing that whole situation with being locked out of systems, it made me think of, I just went to Summerfest in Milwaukee, the big music event they have up there every summer. And Generac, the generator manufacturer, has their own stage. And I remember a time where I couldn't name one generator manufacturer, and I've lived a life long enough to where I actually own one because some issues I had at a previous house. And the people who are actually installing generators on the side of their house, I mean, it's I've said this before, conversations like this lead me to think of how change has occurred and how much of a role metal fabricating plays in that. Because you meet any shop in central Wisconsin, odds are they're probably working with some type of generator manufacturer in that part of the world. So it's change. You may not like it, but I think it's probably good for the metal fabricating industry in general. But it's always best to have access to your systems. One thing I wanted to hit upon before we tune out for this edition, I wanted to welcome Rafael Guerrero. He's our editor on The Welder, and he helped us out with the back page feature for the July issue. I think you'll like it. It has to do with the work that a community college did in creating a piece of a metalworking art related to a motorcycle. They actually worked with one of our good friends. Gareth, was that, who have we, I'm trying to think, who was at our MSD event in Schaumburg?
Stephanie Hoffman.
Yeah, I think Stephanie. I think they worked with her. If not, I apologize. But yeah, I think it's a pretty fun story to read, and you'll like some of the work he's going to be doing. He's getting out there. And as always, I would invite people watching this, if you have a story lead for us, reach out. We'd love to share it. And I think that's about it. Do we have any questions from our viewing audience, Gareth?
No questions.
We had a robust 18 to start, and we're down to 13. Oh, look at that. We retained them, man. That's pretty good.
Oh, my gosh. They didn't leave. That's amazing.
No, it's
Quiet
good.
observers.
Yes, they're quiet observers. So stay tuned for some exciting things coming from us in the near future. Until then, please feel free to reach out if you have a question or comment. And if not, we'll continue trying to do our best to supply you with informative and entertaining content on a monthly basis. Daily basis if you read the fabricator.com. We encourage you to do that as well. Did I miss anything? I don't think so. So thanks a lot for your time. Y'all have a great day. Bye-bye now.